Well, good morning, Southern Oregon, and welcome back to the Real Estate Show. I'm Alice Lema. I'm a broker here in beautiful Southern Oregon with John L. Scott Real Estate and your host of the show. And this week, we're going to run Channin Culley of Ticor Title. She did a fraud episode for us not that long ago, and it was just incredible. So we're going to be running that again. And in the meantime, while we're waiting for that to queue up, let's check in with the stats from all three local counties to see what happened this week. Jackson County prices year over year this week were up, but only by 2%. The average residential home in Jackson County closed at $528,299 this week. The number of sold year over year in Jackson County were down quite a bit. They were down 17% year over year. We only had 28 closings on SOMLS in Jackson County's residential market this week. The number of listings year over year were up 17%. We now have 829 active listings on SOMLS in the Jackson County residential markets this week. And that is an ongoing trend in Jackson County, double-digit increase in inventory. And you know what that means. Let's check in with Josephine County next. Prices year over year in Josephine County were down 17% this year. The average residential home now costing $405,481 in the residential market this week in Josephine County. Number of sold year over year in Josephine County were up a whopping 100%, but that just means there weren't very many the year before. We had 16 closings in Josephine County's residential market on SOMLS this week. The number of listings year over year in Josephine County were up 11%. That's an ongoing trend in Josephine County too, folks. We now have 384 active listings on Josephine County's SOMLS this week. Klamath County prices were neutral this week, year over year. The average residential home in Klamath County now costing $328,250. The number of sold year over year were down 53% in Klamath County residential. There were only 6 closings on SOMLS this week. The number of listings year over year were up in Klamath County residential by 24%. Again, another ongoing trend. We have 338 active listings on Klamath County's residential SOMLS. So you see, folks, we're racking up every week more and more listings, which is great because actually we still have a shortage, but it's getting cleared up closer and closer to the end of the year. We'll have more inventory to meet the demand, but we still don't have quite the right number yet. Keep in touch with the market every week. We bring you all 3 counties on the Real Estate Show so that you can be informed consumers and make good decisions for yourself and your family. So now let's bring on Channin Culley from Ticor Title. She came and did a fraud episode for us, which we really appreciate. Well, Channin Culley, I am so excited to have you on the Real Estate Show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So this all came about because I saw one of your ads for a class that you were giving the real estate agents on fraud. And here we are, you're on the Real Estate Show talking about fraud. So before we get to that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and Ticor Title, and then we'll talk about identifying fraud.
Great. My name is Channin Culley. I'm the Southern Oregon Sales Manager for Ticor Title. And Ticor Title is one of the entities. We're owned by Fidelity National Financial. We're part of that company, which is the largest title company in the United States. So other companies that you may be familiar with besides Ticor Title in our region, there's Chicago Title, there's Lawyers Title, there's Fidelity National Title, and many, many more. So because of our affiliation nationwide like that, we sometimes get a little bit of a head start on some of these fraud schemes that start in another part of the country before they get here. So we're always well in tune with what's going on before we have to deal with it head on.
Well, that's the advantage of being a really big company.
Yeah.
So when you were putting the class together for the agents, what brought that about?
Actually, I get calls frequently from brokers who are getting calls from supposed homeowners who are, or property owners who want to sell. And we've done enough education in our real estate community, all of us, not just me, but as a group, making sure that everybody's aware of the schemes and the frauds that are out there. And so they start to ask questions. And recently we've had a couple of brokers call us and say, hey, can you help us vet this seller before I take a listing from them to make sure that they really are the seller? Because identity fraud is they're impersonating the seller is what they're doing. They call a broker, they try to attach to a broker that's got a great reputation, and they say, I want to list my property. It's usually vacant property, and the seller doesn't usually live in the area. And they want to sell the property, they want to sell it quick, and they want to sell it for usually a less amount than what it's worth. And they call lots of brokers to see who they'll get back. And what we've learned is that when one person stops it and we put that information out to share it with the other brokers in the community, that usually they've called up to sometimes 20, 25 other brokers.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So how is it that the fraudsters, I guess is what we'll call them, think they're going to make money out of this scheme?
Well, what they do is they search the public records. Now, remember, county tax records are public. So anybody can go on there and see the name of who owns a property, whether or not it's improved property, whether or not anybody lives on the property, where the owner does live. And they think, oh, well, this is a great property for me to try to sell. The most recent one I had was a gentleman that owns some property in Ashland, and he actually lives in the area and drove by the property and saw a for sale sign on it. So a broker had fallen for the fraud.
Wow.
And yeah, and it's sad because the brokers, fall victim to it just as easily. If they get that far and get it into a contract, then when it gets to escrow, then that's when we have the next opportunity to stop them. But that's what they do. They try to assume someone else's identity. And there's definitely some red flags I can share with you to be looking out for, not only as a broker, but also as a property owner, things that they should know that people are looking for out there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the scammers are just going through the county records and then identifying what they feel are easy targets.
Correct.
So what happened when the Ashland gentleman drove by and saw a for sale sign?
Well, he called the broker and said, you have my property. I think you have my property listed for sale, and I am not selling it. So immediately the signs went down and everything, and the broker felt horrible. And again, it wasn't the broker's fault. But most of the time, these people are reaching out to our brokers by either by way of telephone or by email, and sometimes by text. And that's the first red flag. If you're not belly to belly with somebody, do they really exist? These people, these fraudsters, they like to hide behind the 4 inches by the 2 inches of your phone. And it's an easy scheme for them to pull off when they don't have to see you face to face.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, what do you call that particular kind of fraud?
I refer to it as seller impersonation.
Seller impersonation. Okay. And does that happen a lot, or is it just here and
So
there?
it does happen a lot. In our area, maybe less than it happens in other places, but we probably run into it, and I would say countywide, including the other title companies as well. We probably run into a case of this at least once a month in the
That
two
is
counties.
often.
Yeah, but our brokers have been so great. They've learned so much, and they are stopping it before it gets to escrow in many cases these days, which is fantastic.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. So, if the fraud were to go through its entire cycle, then this impersonators would get the proceeds.
Right. And then what happens is they get the money and then they close that bank account and they're gone just that quick. As
Wow.
soon as we, so what we do from the escrow side of things is when we get a contract, the first thing we do is we always look at the address. And if it's vacant land and the seller lives out of the area, that's our first red flag. Our second red flag is it's usually a rush. They want it, as for the 35 years I've been in the business, that's always been a red flag. When somebody wants something to happen right now, why? Stop, breathe, and ask why. What is the rush? Because even though what we do in real estate is important, nobody dies if it doesn't happen day after tomorrow. And they want it to happen that quickly, really quickly. And there's usually no mortgages on the property, so we don't have to worry about obtaining payoffs because they would like all of the proceeds. And again, that's information that they obtain through the county records themselves. Then if it were to get that far, which to my understanding locally, it has never that I'm aware of.
Oh,
They
that's
ask,
awesome.
yeah, we have really good, shout out to all the title companies here. We are all well educated and do a good job of making sure that we're stopping it where we can. But once they get the money, they close their account and they disappear. But what they want to do is they want to use their own notary. And notaries, the title companies require our own notaries. And the reason for that is to make sure that we know that somebody that's vetted is witnessing the signature.
Wow, that's crazy. So we're going to have to take a quick break. We're talking to Channin Culley of Ticor Title. She's the Assistant Vice President, Southern Oregon Sales. We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor. So don't go away. Well, hey, Southern Oregon, welcome back to the Real Estate Show. We're so glad you could join us. We are chatting with Channin Culley today of Ticor Title, and we're talking about identifying fraud, which is a really big problem in all the financial markets. But here in Southern Oregon, Channin's giving us some real life stories and what Ticor Title and other title companies are doing about it. Thanks for being on the show, Channin.
You bet.
So right before we went to break, you were talking about how the fraudsters, nobody's ever completed one of these seller impersonation frauds in Southern Oregon, but they can actually theoretically end up with all of the money.
Absolutely. And let's remember what is title insurance. We're in the business of risk, and that's why we ask so many questions and we ask people to jump through hoops and sometimes that can be a little bit of a pain, but we're doing that for a reason because we're protecting the seller, we're protecting the buyer, we're protecting the broker. All of you are obviously very important in our transaction. But if we get a transaction and we can't verify who the seller is, that's a problem for us. If we were to get all the way to the end, to the close of escrow, and we weren't able to adequately identify the seller, but we closed anyway, that's a title insurance claim. That's one of those things that title insurance covers, is making sure that we've got the right people, that we've cleared the right interests in the property. And so obviously for our own safety, we want to make sure that we've cleared all the interests. So making sure we've got the right seller is the first step. The first thing that we always do is double check the tax address with the address that comes to us on a contract for the seller.
Gotcha.
Because the tax address we know is going to the person who's paying the taxes. So we immediately fire off an overnight letter to that address, say, thank you so much for opening escrow with Ticor Title. We're happy to handle this transaction for you. If in fact you have not intended to be in a contract of sale, please reach out to us immediately. And that is usually where it stops for us. That's usually we get the call back almost immediately. I'm not selling my property. I'm not selling my property. You mean somebody's trying to sell my property? And a guy recently, that same instance I spoke of earlier, the Ashland guy, apparently this has happened to him more than one time, because he said again.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it is happening, and they're just looking for vacant land that is obviously not occupied, and the seller lives out of the area.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Well, maybe he should sell it.
Right. Well, it's funny because it usually ends in a conversation with the broker saying, listen, here's the thing. I know you're telling me you don't want to sell it and this wasn't you, but in the event that you do want to sell it, clearly there's somebody who's interested in buying it. So let me hook you up with one of my broker friends.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point. What happens to the buyer in a situation like this? Because the buyers are legit,
yeah.
assuming.
Yep. Buyers are legit. The earnest money's legit. The earnest money's here. And it's kind of a sad scenario because in one that we did last year like this, the buyer had then accepted an offer on the sale of their home so that they could move their RV out to this vacant land while they made plans to build their forever home.
Oh no.
Yeah, so it was kind of an ugly scenario. There was a lot of unrolling that had to happen, and the listing broker felt so bad. But again, I want to reiterate, it's the broker is as much a victim as anyone in this because they don't know, and it's very difficult to tell. And so, if you ever have a question, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to help see if I can find information out. Usually, I can get enough information to be dangerous to help.
So in that class that you were doing for our local brokers, and that's really great because it's also accredited. The brokers can get their continuing education.
Right.
So thank you for providing that.
You're welcome.
So when you were talking about the fraud class to the brokers, what are some of the ways that they could get in front of it before it gets opened in escrow?
That's a great question. So again, I would say that the red flags for the brokers are very similar to the red flags for us, which is, have you met the seller in person? It's okay if you haven't. There's lots of times when real estate is real and it's not fraudulent and you haven't met the seller or the buyer, and that's okay. But just be a little bit more on guard. Raise your suspicions a little bit if you've not met this person before. They're looking for you, usually in an online search. That's how they find your phone number, and then they reach out to you. If they want to sell it on a super rush, that's also a red flag. If they want to close, ASAP, ask yourself why. What's the rush? You've owned this for 30 years. What's the rush now? If the tax address is different than the address that they've provided you on the contract, red flag. Again, this usually is bare land, unimproved properties with out of area owners. After they have their initial conversations with you, they may ask you to only communicate with them via email or via text, because again, these fraudsters like to hide behind the safety of their phone. And so that's something to be concerned about. They'll ask you to message them on WhatsApp, or they may have an email address at outlook.com. That seems to be a commonly used email address at outlook.com.
See, some of us don't want to use WhatsApp.
Correct.
Just for that reason.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. And then of course they'll ask to use their own notary. And we've also learned that at first we thought that when we did get to have a conversation with some of these fraudsters that they all had heavy accents. What we've learned is that maybe they don't have a heavy accent, but they're using AI to alter their voice.
Can you do that?
Yes, you can do that.
Oh my gosh.
It's terrifying, but yes, they can do that. And they do that. And it just makes them, one more arm's length reach away from us for us to figure out who in the heck this is. So when this happens, if we have earnest money, we basically resign from the transaction because it's not a legal transaction, and we give the earnest money back to the buyer, and we move forward. And but it leaves a bad taste in everybody's mouth that had to be involved in it. But just knowing that there's people out there preying on the innocent like that.
Yeah. Wow. And that's causing so much chaos and upheaval in both the buyer and the not seller,
right?
Seller's lives. So that's seller impersonation. Yeah. What are some of the other kinds of fraud that you run into at Ticor?
Well, one thing that we are very, very aware of, and I think every broker is aware of, I hope that we've all done a good job of educating our customers, buyers and sellers about wire fraud. Wire fraud is very much still alive, still happening. And what these fraudsters are doing, I don't know whether they're the same fraudsters or not, but what they're doing is they go online and they do a search for and they're looking for people who have emails that they can get into that have words like sale, proceeds, money, dollars to close, anything like that. And when they find somebody, and brokers tend to be easy prey because once again, they're following the money. Where's the big money? It's in real estate. So who has access to these transactions? The brokers. So they're going to the brokers and they're getting into your emails. And that's why I always say it's a great idea to use your emails through your companies when you can, because those have another layer of protection usually. Whereas your gmail.coms or your live.coms or your, they have a little bit less protection in most cases. And people, they can get this information, and that's how they then break in and they change the wiring instructions
Oh,
to
wow.
their own bank account information. So the title companies, I'm speaking solely for Ticor Title because I can't speak for the others, but I'm pretty sure it's the same. We don't email wiring instructions anymore to the brokers because we want to leave you out of it. We want to leave the brokers out of it so that there's no additional liability on you. We will go straight to the buyers with wiring instructions, and we prefer not to email them, but when we do email them, they're very encrypted and safe, which again creates a little bit of a headache, but it's worth it. So the wire fraud is definitely still something that's very much alive. Always verify your wiring instructions verbally with your escrow agent before you do send a wire, because by the time you send it, if we haven't verified it or we don't know to look for it, it can be gone before we know.
So the fraudsters in the wire fraud situation are actually hacking into the real estate agent's email,
or the buyers or the sellers. And I mean, I'm not saying that the title companies are not that they're exempt from that, but our safety nets are so big and so deep that it is definitely a lot harder for them to get into the title companies' emails for sure. That's why, but we do send everything out encrypted just to make sure.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. We're talking to Channin Culley from Ticor Title. She's the Assistant Vice President of Southern Oregon Sales Manager there at Ticor Title. And you're in the Medford office, is that correct?
I'm located in all of the offices. We have two Medford offices, an Ashland office, and a Grants Pass office.
Oh my gosh. Well, we're going to talk more about that. But we've got to take a quick break. We want to say thank you to our sponsors. We've got John L. Scott, Ashland and Medford, Guy Giles Mutual of Mortgage, and our local Rogue Valley Association of Realtors. Thank you for your support, and we'll be right back. Well, welcome back to the Real Estate Show, folks. I'm Alice Lema, broker here in beautiful Southern Oregon at John L. Scott Real Estate, and want to remind you that this episode is going to repeat tomorrow at 8 a.m., which is Sunday. So you can listen to all of the good advice that Channin Culley has to give. So we're talking to her about identifying fraud. She just did a class for the local real estate agents community, and that was this morning. And right before we went to break, we were just finishing up talking about wire fraud.
Yes. So my advice is always, whenever you're sending a wire, make sure you verify the information verbally with your escrow agent. That's the person who can verify it for you. We want to make sure that your money doesn't get into the wrong hands. And that's the best way to do it.
Yeah. So what other kinds of fraud were you talking to the agents about, or do you run into?
So another type of fraud that agents are a little bit less aware of because it happens after the close of escrow. And after the close of escrow, the broker's job is kind of done. I know they still stay in the picture for the relationship, but people often don't ask the brokers about this. But there's a misconception out there that the title companies share buyers and sellers information after the close of escrow. And I mean like addresses and things like that. We do not. That's absolutely not what we do. But there's literally people who are paid to scour the public records every single day, including Jackson and Josephine County. And so they find out who just bought a house, who just sold a house, who just got a new mortgage, who just got a new second. And it makes us very much exposed to these people. So, for example, have you ever noticed that when you've done a refinance or you've purchased a new home, suddenly you get deluged with credit card offers?
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
yeah, they know that you are creditworthy because you just bought a house and you took out a mortgage, right? But the frauds that happen on this end happen more in the way of refunds. People will reach out. It's easy to Google somebody's and find their phone number, and they'll reach out and say, "Hey, I'm from ABC Mortgage," which again, your mortgage company is public record, "and you just paid us off." They know that because they saw that you just sold the property. "And I have an additional refund for you. If you'd like to provide me with your banking information, I will get that refund going and we'll get that straight into your bank for you."
Oh, no.
Yes. Yep. And they're doing the same thing with the buyers too, saying, "Hey, I'm with the bank and it looks like we have a little bit of extra money that needs to come your way. What is your wiring or your bank account information?" So, and buyers and sellers, it happens so quickly, and there's so much going on in their world at the time that they're selling or buying a home that frequently they don't think twice about it, and that happens all the time. Also, a new buyer is subject to lots of mail saying, important, open now, and it's usually it's insurance offers, it's home warranty offers, it's new mortgage offers, and things like that. And these people pretend to have all of your information, or they pretend to already be a part of your world, and they're not. And it's so easy to fall victim to these. I get them all the time. And my husband, if he was in charge, he'd sign up for all of them because he thinks that that's what he needs to do because they tell him that. So, so luckily I'm there to help. But I mean, I'm just, for a family that's pretty aware of this, he still would fall victim to it if I wasn't there to stop it.
Oh my gosh. So, so if there is a legitimate refund, what do you do?
Well, most of the time, a legitimate refund is either going to come to you in the form of a check or it may go through the escrow company. So if we overpaid somebody, they may send the check back to escrow, and then escrow will reopen up their file and put that information in, revise your closing statement, and send you the money that was refunded. And that happens occasionally because we do try to make sure that when we're sending a wire, and in some cases, there's some places that still only take checks. So we need to make sure that there's enough money in there to cover the per diem of interest. So we do try to make sure we have a little bit of a cushion. It's usually not much, but occasionally a seller's final payment will cross, and it wasn't on our payoff statement. So they may have an entire payment coming back to them. And reserves are another area where this happens.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
I've got taxes and insurance that needs to come back to you. And so it's about just knowing who you're speaking with and, calling them back on the number that is the mortgage servicer that you worked with. And no, don't call them back on the number that they called you from because that's still the
Oh,
fraudster,
that's really
right?
good advice.
Yeah. And I would always request a check. Great. If you owe me money, send me a check. That would be fantastic. Obviously, you have my address. Thank you so much. But they don't ever give banking account information over the phone, especially to somebody who's calling you that you didn't call.
Yeah. So I guess I was going to ask you, how much of a red flag is it when you get a phone call?
Well, the fact that they're calling you and asking you for banking information, that's just a standard across the world red flag, right? We have people that get calls locally saying, "Hey, your nephew is in jail and he needs money to
Oh,
get out. So
yeah.
what's your bank account information?"
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, that people might have a little more common sense against that sort of fraud because we don't do the real estate sales and purchases every single day. On average, it happens about once every 7 years that we're involved in a real estate transaction. And so our common sense sort of goes out the window a little bit. Um,
Hmm.
so it's just good to keep your guard up at all times and never ever give out your banking information over the phone until you've verified who you're speaking with, and certainly not if they've called you. They need to allow you the opportunity to call them on the number that that you feel safe about.
Hmm. Well, and what you just said about hanging up and then calling back the mortgage servicer or whatever entity that
Right.
that's who they are. That's very good way to check back.
And
So,
another fraud that has happened in the past that's not as prevalent anymore is you get a letter from a new mortgage servicer saying, hey, we bought your loan, so start sending your payments to us. Don't ever do that until you've received a bye-bye letter from the company that was servicing you, because that's another
oh,
method of fraud. And we've had, a few cases of where people have gotten into default problems because they were making their payments every single month, but guess what? Not to the actual mortgage servicer.
so you said bye-bye letter. What's that?
A letter from your existing lender that says, bye bye, thank you very much. We've sold your mortgage to XYZ. You'll be receiving a letter from them soon.
I see. Yeah. So that's the safety net right there. Yeah. And so are they communicating through the mail sometimes?
Yeah, most
Yeah.
of the time, mail or phone, because it's so easy. I mean, literally, if you've never tried to Google yourself and put in your first name, your last name, your area, and phone number, and it will give you a phone number. It will come up with phone numbers for you.
Wow, that's good advice.
Yeah. And as real estate professionals, you and I, we want that, right? We want people to go, oh, I want to call Alice Lema, so I want to look up her phone number. But for Joe Q buyer and seller, not so much.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's really kind of alarming how organized these scammers are. We just have a couple minutes left in this segment, but I did want to touch on earnest money fraud.
Yeah.
Do we have much of that anymore?
We don't, at least not that I'm aware of in our area, but we have had a couple of instances where somebody has a buyer has entered a contract on a quick close, and they have reached out to us and said, well, since we're closing next week, I'm just going to wire you all of the money all at once. And then they disappear. So I don't know what their intentions are or why that's happened, but they obviously we're not going to close if we don't have any money, but they have to have earnest money in. And earnest money, by the way, is super easy to deposit with the escrow companies. You can drop off a check. You can mail it to us. Just again, remember, it needs to be in by the time on your contract to stay in contract. Or we even have a mobile deposit. So we can send a link straight to the buyer, and the buyer can deposit it on their mobile phone.
Really?
Yeah.
That's very cool.
It is very cool, and it is very safe. We've tested it for years before we brought it to market, and we've not had any problems with it.
Wow. So is that like just a digital transfer?
Yeah.
Like similar
It's
to
just like when
Zelle
you
or
do,
Venmo?
it's just like when you do the bank deposits, how you can take a
Yeah.
picture of the check and you're
Uh-huh.
depositing that check. It's the same thing. You're taking a picture of it and you're sending it through to us, and then we get the money that way.
I
It
don't
still
think a
counts
lot of
as
people know that.
yeah, it still counts as a personal check for deposit purposes.
Oh, I see.
So it's not a wire, and it's not a ACH. It's a deposit of a check electronically.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Well, that's very cool. And I don't think very many people know about that.
Yeah, well, it's something we try to remind people about it, but Southern Oregon tends to be a little bit
Behind.
we're old school. Everybody, we're
Little
just a
bit
little
old
bit old
school.
school, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but they like to have their hands on the check. They like to hold it for a minute. That's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to take a quick break. We're talking to Channin Culley of Ticor, Assistant Vice President of Southern Oregon Sales Management. Well, welcome back to the Real Estate Show, folks. We are having a very interesting conversation with Channin Culley from Ticor Title, and we're talking about identifying fraud. And during the break, Channin brought up kind of impersonation fraud of showings. I don't know what we would call that, but it also kind of wraps into real estate agent safety.
Right. Well, September is Broker Safety Month, and that's very important to all of us in the industry. It's probably been about 25, maybe 30 years ago, we had an incident here in the Valley where two of our own were murdered. And that's been a long time ago. More recently, we've all become aware of a couple of cases, including Beverly Carter about 10 years ago, where she received a call from somebody to go show her property. She met them out there. She did everything right. She let somebody know where she was going. She told people who she was meeting with, but it turns out the person that she was meeting there wasn't the person that they said they were. And so my advice to every buyer, potential buyer out there, is to be considerate. If a broker is asking you for a copy of your driver's license or for some validating information of who you are, don't get frustrated. Don't hang up on them. They're only trying to secure their own safety, and they need to do that, because being a broker is can be a dangerous job. And so, we like to bring attention to the fact that there are platforms out there. One specifically that I'm speaking of is a platform that we're working with, and I'll be having some more information and some classes on this coming up in the next week or so, with regards to it basically ties the broker's phone to the buyer's phone. So once the broker gets where the buyer is, now this agency can track not only the broker, but also this person. But before the broker gets there, they're going to find out they can plug their information into the phone. They plug in the phone number, and it's going to tell you whether or not this is a burner phone. A burner phone is something that you can go to Fred Meyer or Walmart and you can purchase without necessarily any identifying trackability. That's what a burner phone is. And so we want to make sure that the person you're meeting really is the person you think, and it also does a quick little background check on them and lets you know,
That's
this guy,
amazing.
yeah, if this person just got out of prison for kidnap, it's a good idea for you to know that before you go meet them out in Trail, Roosh.
Oh my God.
And their intentions are not good. And that's why I brought it up under the fraud precept, is because it's their intentions are not to buy a property. Their intentions are to harm you, maybe to rob you, maybe to kill you, maybe to hold you for ransom, which was the case in Beverly Carter's case. They tried to get a ransom from her husband, but they didn't reach him. And so had she had a safety platform in place, perhaps the outcome would have been different. We can all hope, and hopefully we all learned something from her case so that her death was not in vain, because that was certainly a sad case.
Yeah, it's very, very tragic, and close to home.
Yeah.
So are you allowed to say the names of these platforms?
I'm holding out on it just a little bit longer because I need to do another training session with my team.
Gotcha.
Next week, I'll have some more information on that, and I will be rolling it out. I also believe that the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors, through your membership through RVAR via NAR, I believe you also have access to a platform through them as well. So the truth is, I don't care what platform my brokers use. I want them just to use something, because I want them to be safe. I would like to see them next week. I don't want to not see them again because they didn't want to pay the $15 a month or whatever it might be to stay safe.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting how far technology has come and how quickly. The idea that you can go onto this platform and punch in the phone number of the person you're supposed to be meeting and have it give you an analysis of who they are and if the phone is legit. That's really incredible.
It is.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So stay tuned for some more information on that. We will be rolling that out hot and heavy probably within a week or so. So
well, we'll have to have you back. Maybe we could do a whole radio show segment on that, because it's very, very interesting how people are impersonating buyers. And we haven't heard very many stories about people impersonating sellers, but theoretically it could work that way too.
Right. Well, and just to be clear, I have no stake in the game for these agencies or these platforms that do this, other than wanting my friends and my customers to stay safe. So these are not owned by Fidelity or Ticor Title. They're just companies that we have vetted on our end that we want to be able to tell our brokers about so that they can be safer.
Yeah. And maybe next week I can get a list from you and we'll put that up on the website.
Absolutely. You bet.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, just wanted to spend a couple minutes on title fraud, because we started to hear more about that. What is that, and how big of a deal is it?
Are you referring to the commercials on TV and on public radio about I forgot what it's called.
Well, yeah, people who get their house taken away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So obviously, as I said, that can happen. If it's an insured transaction, that's where the title insurance company steps in to protect the buyer, also to protect the seller. So that is not going to happen. Obviously, the only way that that's going to happen is if it's an uninsured transaction. There's very few uninsured transactions that happen. They do happen. Don't get me wrong, they do happen. They happen maybe more in other areas than here. In Oregon, when you're working with a real estate broker, it has to go, there has to be title insurance. So, so that protection is already in place, but it can happen. Do I think that maybe those companies that are selling, identity protection to your property, maybe they're profiting a little bit off of fear, because hopefully the title companies are doing their job, the brokers are helping out, and we're making sure that the right people are selling the property, and the owner shouldn't have to worry about it. So, be mindful before you sign up for that $199 a month.
Oh, that's
protection.
good to know.
Yeah.
That's good to
And
know.
you can always call any of the title companies. We all have a customer service department, and the customer service department can verify ownership for you. It can, if you called me and let's say you've been living in Guam for the last 5 years and you just wanted to check to see if everything was, is the property still in my name? Yes, the property's still in your name. Or maybe, no, it's not. What happened? We could talk about that then, but that happens very rarely around here. So it is something that happens. But I think that sometimes those commercials can be a little bit, preying on fear.
Well, I'm glad I asked because I thought it was a real common occurrence.
It's definitely can be common in other areas. We don't see it here very often at
Mm-hmm.
all. When we do see it here, so keep in mind, if a title company comes across a transaction and we're closing a deal where there has been a prior uninsured transaction, we're going to stop and we're going to step back in time and find out what happened. Why is that an uninsured transaction? Because we may need to go back to that prior seller to make sure that they did in fact sell the property, or intend to sell the property, even though there was not title insurance. Most of the time, that's been done in a case of trying to establish heirship, like, oh, I deeded the property to my grandson or something like that. But those are also very easy cases of elder abuse. So we have to be very careful that somebody, a grandson or a granddaughter didn't talk grandma into deeding the property over to them, for $0. And now grandson or granddaughter is selling the property for $385,000 a year and a half later. So, so it's our job again to make sure that all of the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, to make sure that we're providing good and clear title to the buyer.
Well, and that's an interesting kind of fraud of elders, and I wonder how often that happens, and maybe without people really realizing it. And I know we don't have very much time left, but there's people that do go around making offers to older people, like all cash, you don't have to do anything, way below market. And I wonder if that would be considered borderline fraud.
It's not fraudulent if the buyer and the seller agree on the price, right? But could it be somewhat predatory? Yeah, you bet. Sometimes people don't recognize how quickly real estate gains in value, and that's why it is a good vehicle for your money, for your future. So and sometimes, when they bought a home for $75,000 30 years ago, they don't realize that now it could be worth $300,000.
Especially here in Southern Oregon.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Channin, thank you so much. It's been such a delight to have you on the show. I hope you'll come back because we'll have some other topics to go into.
Oh, you bet. Absolutely. I would love to. Thank you for having me.
Great. Channin Culley, Ticor Title. Just a reminder, the episode will repeat tomorrow at 8 a.m. and that's Sunday. And we want to say thank you again so much to our sponsors. We really appreciate you helping us bring the show to the airwaves every week. Have a beautiful Southern Oregon weekend. Bye now.